Chapter 5 in the book Tribal Church is entitled The Leadership Tribe. You know, when I began my ministry, I spent most of my time doing ministry. I spent a little bit of my time leading. Well, that's changed over the years, and so there's been a transition that moves where I'm still doing ministry, but I'm spending more and more time leading, and I'm spending more and more time leading leaders, and I'm spending more and more time resourcing leaders of leaders. Now, the truth is that you do all of that in the beginning, but you do more on the back end of that equation than on the front end. You spend less time actually doing and doing more through others, through your leadership and through your leading leaders and through your resourcing those who are leaders of leaders. There's just so much time in every day. And in order to do more and more as your church grows, to minister to more and more families, you've got to do your ministry through other people. You know, it's no wonder that most churches in America run less than 150 people, because that's just about all that one person can lead. And if we're ever going to impact big, we've got to lead small. We've got to lead a smaller group of people called leaders. Now, one of the things that we must do is we must delegate to those leaders. And the way that you delegate to the leaders is to, first of all, to make sure that you and that leader that you're delegating to has a shared vision and value. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that you agree on the purpose and you also agree on the methods by which that you accomplish that purpose, the values like God's work deserves our best, and values that speak about how we treat people. So there's got to be shared vision and values. Many times whenever you hand over a task to someone, you hand them a book and you hand them a destination, you say, good luck with that, and then they start going in ways that you don't want them to go, and then you say, well, I knew I needed to do it myself, and that's not really the answer. The answer is to make sure that both of you agree on the destination and both of you agree on the particular values that's going to get them toward that destination. So that's the first thing, shared vision and values. The second thing that you must have nailed down is to have absolute truth-telling. Because no matter how well you think that you've communicated that shared vision and values, there are always going to be difference of opinion. And you've got to be able to go back to that person and you've got to say, now remember we said we want it to look like this in the end. Now you can get there several different ways and you can operate out of your own personality and you can list some of your own preferences, but it's got to look like this or accomplish this purpose in the end. Or you're violating this value or this other value. See, the problem in the church many times is that we communicate people's failures to other people, but we don't tell the people who need to hear it. The Bible says that we violate not only good management, but we violate a biblical principle when we don't speak the truth with love. And so we've got to be rigorous about absolute truth-telling. So first of all, it's shared vision and values. Second of all, it's absolute truth-telling. And then the third component of proper delegation is contact without control. And what I mean by that is you've got to have some way to dip down every once in a while and find out what a person is doing to make sure that they're on track. Now that can be a simple system where they report. It can be a form of some kind. It can be that you have a regular time of going to the activities that you've delegated to them, but you've got to have some catalytic way. And by catalytic, I mean that it happens when you're not thinking about it. It happens because it's regularly scheduled, where you know what's going on. And so, first of all, shared vision and values. Second of all, you've got to have absolute truth-telling. And then finally, you've got to have some kind of contact without micromanagement, contact without control. If you don't have contact without control, you haven't really delegated, you've abdicated a responsibility. And then as we give our paid workers and our volunteers responsibility, we need to make sure that they're paid for the work that they do. And I think that there's at least 10 ways that you can pay people. The first, obviously, is money. And we don't pay all of the people who are leaders in our church, but there are some leaders that we do pay. And we need to make sure that we're paying them a competitive salary that compensates them for their expertise and allows them to provide for their family. The other 9 ways that I would suggest that you compensate your leaders and your volunteers has absolutely nothing to do with money. The first is public thanks. There are some people that from time to time you need to get up in front of their peers and you need to affirm them for their service. And there's nothing unspiritual about the fact that they're wired in such a way to be encouraged when they are publicly thanked. We have many examples in the Bible where that takes place. The third way that you can compensate somebody is by private thanks. There are some people that if you thank them publicly, it would not be a benefit to them, it would actually be torture to them. And you better know whether someone wants to be thanked publicly or they want to be thanked privately. On the other hand, there are people that if you praise them in front of their peers and you thank them, but you didn't send them a private note, they wouldn't feel like they got thanked. And on the other hand, there are folks that you could send the private note, but if you didn't thank them publicly, they wouldn't feel like that they've been paid. Now, the fourth way that you can compensate those who either volunteer or work for you as a paid staff member is you can give them more responsibility. When you give a person more responsibility, you're saying, I believe in you, I trust you. And it also inspires them and it challenges them to go to new heights. I have a particular staff member and I could pay him a good salary and I could thank him publicly. But if I don't trust him by giving him more responsibility, he does not feel like that he's been compensated. The next way that you can pay your volunteers and pay your staff is by allowing them to have input. You know, there are a lot of folks that are on our team and they don't have to have their way on everything, but they would like to have their way considered. And the truth is some of our folks who are grassroots volunteers, the folks who are on the front lines, they know a lot more about the ministry than we do. I've found over the years that committees make really lousy decisions, that leaders make good decisions, but leaders only make good decisions when they have the input of the larger committee, when they have the input of the volunteers who are actually doing the frontline work. You know, many times when we want information, the best source of information is from our receptionist because she's the one who's talking to our members on a regular basis. She has more of a pulse of what's really going on in our church. And so when you allow all of your leaders to sit around that table when major decisions are being made and to give input before those decisions are made, there are a lot of folks who will stay on your team. And then there are those, number 6, who would like access. Now this may sound funny to you, but there are people who will actually work long, hard hours to help you accomplish your purpose as a church just to hang out with you. And when you give your leaders access to you, and when you don't hide yourself away from the rank and file, you're going to find that more people serve and they serve a longer time. And then the next is empowerment. Now, what do I mean by empowerment? Well, it's simply this, that you give a particular volunteer or a paid worker clear parameters. There may be parameters like finances or a budget or the values of our church or maybe doctrinal parameters. But within those parameters, they have the freedom to operate their ministry to accomplish the vision that you and they agree upon the way they would do it, not the way you would do it. And when you give them that freedom, especially a high caliber leader needs that freedom to exercise their leadership gift. The next is significance. Some of our workers will best be paid by helping to remind them of the eternal significance that their service brings. Let me give you a good example of that. From time to time, I will stand up in a worship service and I will tell a story about a man or a woman that came to our church. And they first came to our church not because they thought that they needed to be in church, but they felt like that their children needed to be in church. And so they bring their child, maybe it's a preschooler, maybe it's a grade schooler, and they attend for a while and they kind of lose interest in it, but their child keeps asking, hey mom, hey dad, are we going back to church? And they come back to church because their child has had such a good experience. And as a result, that particular person hears the gospel and they come under conviction and then they get saved. And I like to remind our people that even though I'm high profile in terms of my job as a pastor, and a lot of times people see me as the hero in a story like that, the real hero is the person who worked with that little 4-year-old or that little 5-year-old and gave them a positive experience at church so that they asked their mom or their dad if they could go back to church. And here you've got a volunteer that volunteered because they saw the eternal significance. But after about 3 or 4 months of crawling around the floor, picking up toys and having soggy Ritz crackers all over them, they forget why they volunteered. And it's your job as a leader to remind them to connect their service with an eternal significance. Then another way that we can pay those who volunteer and those who are on our staff is with knowledge. as a reader, I'm always coming across great books. And when I give one of those books to one of my volunteers, I not only have given them the value of that book, whether it's $14.95 or $19.95, but I've read 3 really bad books to find that one good book. And I have saved them countless of hours. And the fact that I know them and I know what their need is and what would help them grow as a leader, and I give them a great book on that particular topic, I've given them a really great gift. If I go to a conference or I hear a sermon and I share the learnings of that conference or the learnings of that sermon with my staff or with young volunteers, then what I've done is I've given them a wonderful gift that will pay dividends for years and years. You could go to my office today, and just outside of my office is a closet. And in that closet, I have maybe 25 books that have most influenced me over the years. And I have multiple copies of those. I never go to lunch or breakfast that I don't take one of those books with me and hand to a key staff member or a key leader and thank them for the work they're doing in our church and give them the gift of knowledge. And then finally, a 10th way that you can pay your volunteers and you can pay your staff is you can let them be a part of something of excellence. Several years ago, I was visiting with our worship leader, and I said, Danny, what motivates you? What really pays you? Is it public thanks? Is it private thanks? Is it more responsibility? Is it knowledge? Is it having your job connected in an eternal way in significance? And he said, Steve, it's none of those things. And I said, well, it has to be one of those things. That's my list. He said, no, it's something else. And I said, well, can you describe it? And he said, it is that you have so structured my job that I am set free to do that which is in my unique ability. And you've given me the tools so that I can lead worship with excellence and I can give an offering that is acceptable to God. And Danny gets compensated with a paycheck twice a month. But the greatest paycheck I give him is the freedom to do what God created him to do with excellence. Now here's my question. How are you paying your leaders? More importantly, how are you paying your leaders who are volunteers? What would you do if you went to work 1 month, 2, 3, and you never received a paycheck? I'll tell you what you'll do. You would quit your job. And some of you are having your volunteers quit because you've never paid them. You say, well, Steve, how do I know how they want to get paid? Well, it's very simple. You just ask them. You take this list of 10 ways to pay someone, take money off because that kind of muddies up the water for your volunteers, but take the last 9 and just ask them, what are the top 2 things on that list that inspire you or would encourage you? And your leaders will tell you. If you were to go to my office today, you could look over my desk and I have the list of those folks that I directly supervise. And next to their name are the top 3 ways that they want to be encouraged. I've got a staff member that I supervise, and his primary way of getting paid is input. And so sometimes I can see that staff member kind of dragging, and I call him into my office and I would say, you know, I'm about to make a decision about such and such. It may not even be in his area of expertise. Tell me your feedback on that. And when he leaves my office, he leaves with a bounce in his step. He leaves invigorated because I have allowed him to have input in something he knows is a very important decision in our church. And the other thing is I benefit from it because many times, even if it's not in his area of responsibility or even in his area of expertise, his input helps me make a better decision, looking at the facts with fresh eyes. If we're going to have leaders in our church, we've got to do a couple of things. One is we've got to always constantly be looking for those leaders, encouraging those young leaders. We've got to begin to delegate to them, make sure we have shared vision and values, make sure that we have absolute truth-telling, make sure that we have some way of knowing what they're doing, and then as they're faithful with a little bit, to give them much, to move them from the lower levels of leadership to those higher levels. And then we've got to make sure whatever level that they are on, that we're paying those people who make up the tribe called leaders.